Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. I'm your host, Evan Mack, here with HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner. In this kickoff episode, we're diving into Terry's journey from government attorney to legal strategist and uncovering what makes HUD-backed deals succeed, stall, or scale. This is Blueprint Begins. Terry Bruner on HUD, legal power plays, and why mission still matters. Terry, sir, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Evan. It's great to be here today.
Awesome. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Terry, let's start with your background. How did your career in law and government lead to your work in HUD and TPA transactions?
Circuitously, that's what I'll say. Very circuitously. Well, I'll start from the law part of it. So I was a law student, and I, like most law students, was scouting about for summer internships, and I worked one summer for a local HUD office. And in that local HUD office, I was kind of blown away because the person who was in charge of the legal department there took a very keen mentoring eye to me and kind of showed me the ropes, so to speak, of what HUD was and how HUD played into the real estate market, particularly the multifamily real estate market, which I frankly, I had no clue about. And HUD just sounds like a government alphabet soup, frankly, housing and urban development. So I knew it had something to do with housing, and I wasn't a complete novice to it. But it was that summer where I was exposed basically to the work of HUD. And then Gloria, my mentor at the time, encouraged me to apply for the entry level position at HUD for attorneys. It's called the Legal Honors Program, which I applied to the next year. So I had a choice to make basically between taking a job with the government and going to work for a private law firm. Now, most lawyers are kind of trained to go get the golden nugget, the brass ring, which is to work at a private firm, make a lot of money. And so when I started telling people, I think I'm going to go work at HUD, they were just shocked. Like, why in the heck would you do that? You have loans, you have all of these things. And so you've spent 3 years doing this to go work for the government. But I don't think what they really understood about me, and this is not a disparagement to them. I don't think they really understood what motivated me, which was really looking for some deeper purpose in the law, frankly. So I was interested in policy. I was interested in housing, and I was interested really in solving very practical problems. And so I forewent making a big paycheck for a couple of years and went and learned the lay of the land and became a pretty good attorney working for the government in that time.
Amazing. How important was Miss Gloria to your career? You know what I mean? If you looking back,
she was instrumental. Gloria Aldridge is her name, and she was the local chief counsel at the HUD office in Houston, and she was sort of like a mama. She was like a work mama. She was very caring and just very keen on where did I see myself in the next how many ever years. But it taught me really the value of just mentoring and mentorship, and what I learned from her, as well as my first boss at HUD, when I actually became a real employee at HUD, was that you got to look out for people. And there's a responsibility to bring sort of the next generation, but even if not the next generation, just other people along the ride. So I don't think I'm saying this out of turn or in any kind of hyperbolic way, but if it weren't for Gloria, I probably wouldn't be sitting where I'm sitting now. So she was really the catalyst for all of that. Yeah.
And for the people at home that really don't know what HUD is, can you kind of break it down from a novice perspective? If somebody's tuning into this podcast and they're seeing Terry sitting down, like, what are these letters they're talking about?
Yeah, no, it's like alphabet soup, right? So it's a federal agency called the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Most people, when they think of HUD, they think of affordable housing, Section 8,
right?
Which is kind of the common term that most people think of. I think most people would be shocked just how instrumental HUD and the federal government are in the nation's housing supply. So when you're buying a house, there's a robust program through the Federal Housing Administration, which is a part of HUD. But HUD also plays a very big role in apartments, which is kind of the bailiwick that my firm has developed over these years. But really its mission is to build housing and to support economic and urban development, but not just in urban cores, like across the country.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit about, the purpose that you wanted to serve, but you work both in public service and private law. What drew you specifically to the kind of the intersection of housing policy and even community?
Well, so I think you have to kind of start from from my foundational story. So I come from a family of public servants. My dad is retired military, also a retired civil servant. My mom worked for most of her career in the public sector. Many of my family also served in the military. I myself am a veteran of the United States Army. In addition to having been a teacher and also just serving on the boards of a lot of nonprofits. So I kind of bring with me into this work a lot of perspective around what it means to serve. And I'm a big proponent that you've got to find something in your life that's not just about making money. So for me, housing was one of the most foundational things. I mean, we all have some place to live, right? We all need some place to live. And so for me, as I kind of rounded the basis of law school, just to be very frank about it, I was interested in doing something good, but at the same time, I wanted to make some money as well. And for me, that was about solving practical problems, and nothing was more practical than housing and where one lives. So I came at this really through kind of a family history, but also just my own personal motivations around wanting to do something practical in the law and serve something that was a little bit bigger than me, but at the same time, earning a good life, and I mean earning a good living doing it.
You said you served. You said some of your family served. Like my mother and father were fortunate enough to serve. Do people have to say thank you for your service when they see you? Do they have to say it?
If they know, they will say it. But I'm very proud of my military service, but I don't wear it on my sleeve.
Absolutely.
I don't walk around. When you go to the VA, you see those old vets and they're walking around with their caps on.
Yes.
That's not my style. But I appreciate them doing it, and I will tell them thank you for your service. But when people say it, like on Veterans Day or something like that, or even sometimes the staff will say, hey, appreciate your service or that kind
Yeah.
of thing. It's cool, but it's not something that I just wear on my sleeve.
My dad had his Air Force hat glued to his head, so he's one of those that we hanging out at the Legion.
Listen. My dad tells me all the time, "Hey, you need to go down to the VA," and I'm like I think those guys love just hanging out at the VA for some
They
reason.
do. You said affordable housing is more about compliance. It's about community. Is that the mission that kind of drives your work essentially?
Yeah, I think the mission really is twofold. I think number one, everyone deserves a good quality, decent, and affordable place to live, no matter where you're stationed along the economic spectrum. That's part of it. The other side of it, though, which is something I think I've alluded to already. It's okay to make money providing affordable, decent housing. And I think sometimes the story of housing, particularly in America, and if you live in a city like I do, it's sometimes pitched as this battle between, those who can make a lot of money doing it and then those who need a place to stay. And so you've got this very dichotomized, stretch of thought around what is housing and who should be providing it. I think both things can be true. And so in our firm, we obviously represent a lot of developers and investors who are interested in getting into these projects and getting involved and invested in these sorts of things. And what I say all the time is, look, everyone deserves the opportunity to have a great place to live and to stay. But at the same time, there should not be any shame in making money doing it as long as it's done the right way. I think in a deeper sense, though, Evan, if you look at like most of the indicators, social indicators and otherwise, I mean, the research says that, a kid's one of the biggest determinants of kids and how they'll fare in life outcome wise is, your zip code, where they live. Most
Mhm.
folks, for most people, your house, your home is the biggest single investment that you'll ever make. And so obviously that gets into questions of value and, because someone lives on this side of the street versus the other side of the street, or this side of the freeway versus the other side of the freeway, which is worth more. So I think, multiple things can be true at the same time, but at the core of it, it's really about providing very good places to stay within a community context, but being okay with people earning a very honest buck in terms of supplying those services.
Absolutely. So, what do you think the biggest misstep you see developers make when they follow all the rules, but they kind of still end up in legal trouble?
Well, I'm laughing because if you spend a lot of time around developers, most developers are, and I don't mean this in any kind of a shading way, but most developers are kind of gamblers. They're like folks who go to Vegas a lot, and they think the next big one is right around the corner, and they will leverage so many things and so many resources for the sake of one project or for the sake of one deal, without really doing their homework about whether or not the deal actually makes sense in a longer term perspective or not.
Mhm.
I think there's a little bit of that, but I also think there's a little bit of I've done this a lot. I know what this is.
Right.
It's almost kind of like I know more than you kind of thing. And if you've ever dealt with the federal government in any capacity, it's a very humbling enterprise, very humbling experience.
There's the paperwork, then there's the power dynamics. What part of the TPA process do people kind of overlook because they're too focused on maybe their own narrow interests?
Yeah. So okay. So this kind of gets into like into our day to day. Again, when you're dealing with the government, everything has a checklist to it. Everything has a process. I think there's oftentimes a misconception around how tedious the process is. So even if you've got a checklist that has 40 things on it, right? You may supply those 40 things, and most people, I think, who've never done this work would think, okay, I've given you your 40 things. So check those checks, check those boxes, and we're good to go. That's the end of it. Where they're not accounting for the fact that these are humans. These are
Mm,
not AI bots or agents who are doing this work, not yet anyway. We're still dealing with people. And to the extent that we're dealing with people, sometimes they just may not understand the transaction. Sometimes they may not understand the deal. Sometimes they may just have other questions. And that process leads to other things, other
right.
pieces of information that invariably are going to take time. And so when you do that, when that process is engaged, really not having a firm understanding of the fact that this is still a human process, and that process, no matter what the deal is, no matter how valuable the deal is, no matter how experienced you are, that process is still going to be what it is. Now, obviously, our job is to make sure that we circumvent that process as much as we
Mhm.
can, but the process still remains. And I think a lot of the people that we work with sometimes underestimate just how tedious that process can be.
So, what's the one thing you wish every project partner understood before they kind of step into a HUD deal?
Patience. Patience and timeline. Understanding again that we could present the best possible situation to the federal government on behalf of a client, on behalf of a developer. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes it still takes time. So
Mm,
I wish that more people who came to this work understood that, and understood that, the timing is the timing. But I think the other piece of it too, which is just kind of add an addendum, is understanding that these are kinds of processes where you have to have like a certain number of things. You have to have a certain way of doing business. You have to have a certain kind of organizational structure. And anytime you start going outside of that, sort of coloring outside the lines, not saying that that won't be approved or that it's not good enough, but sometimes that adds layers of complexity. Layers of complexity ends up being time.
You've been on both sides, the government side, the private side. How do you kind of balance protecting the deal and then protecting the people? You know what I mean? Because if you're like, especially when you're the timelines and the politics collide and kind of clash.
It's a delicate balance. I probably say this way more than I should internally, but there's the competence, there's the expertise of doing a deal and getting a deal done. And
Right.
most developers have some sense of that. Most investors have some sense of that. I think what they really don't have a sense of is the soft skills that are necessary that are involved in these sorts of transactions. And this I think applies to real estate in general. I mean, I there's a friend of mine. She's an older lady here, and she owns some property in a very valuable part of the city. I'm in Houston. I'm sitting in Houston, and she owns property in a very valuable part of the city. And she, gets approached probably, if not weekly, then certainly every other week from some developer who wants to purchase her property. And some of this property has family connection, family tie. She and her husband, her late husband, bought some of this property together. So obviously, there's a sentimentality that comes
Absolutely.
along with that. I was talking to her the other day, and she said, these guys come and they think that they can throw around a couple of $100,000 or more, and I'm supposed to jump at that. And she said, "What is that to me?" And I didn't laugh at her, but I laughed at the way in which she said it, because I think it hints at something broader, which is it doesn't matter how much money you're able to bring to these transactions or to these deals. At the end of the day, housing is still a very personal choice, and it doesn't matter if it's a single family house or if it's a multifamily complex. Like we represent sometimes at our firm, developers who may have a family run business, and they've developed one or two of these properties and they've passed it along to their children. And sometimes, even though the economics say you should sell or you should do this or that, sometimes they just don't want to do that. Sometimes it's more than just the dollars and cents. And I think really having a firm understanding, a firm idea of kind of what that looks like, in such a way that you can navigate some of those soft skills, I think that's the piece that if I could spend an inordinate amount of time with folks who are interested in doing real estate at this level, I would sort of coach them on what does it take, not just to do the hard transaction part of it, but the soft skills part of it, because it's just as important.
Not always about the money, huh?
No, it's not. Look, and we're talking about blueprint to billions, and we're saying it's not always about the money, but sometimes it's about how do you get to the money. And I think the soft people skills part of it, that's just as much about getting to those dollar signs as it is about whether or not you make a competitive offer or you understand how to navigate a certain process or not.
So when HUD says yes, most people assume that like that's a green light. But what happens next? What's the process? Why does some deals stall even after they get approved?
So I'll give you an example, a fairly recent example from our shop. So we go through a process with HUD, and you mentioned TPAs a few times. It's really a loan assumption. It's called the transfer of physical assets. But we'd gone through that process. We'd gotten approval, and usually when you get an approval from the federal government, that's green light, thumbs up, go for it. Go forward and prosper. This particular deal stalled and really had to be reworked because there were internal problems with the deal group. So partners basically were having some disagreements. There were some issues around insurance. There were some just things that probably should have been buttoned up much sooner that just weren't. And that added a time lag. And so the deal then really became complicated because, again, people are involved, right? So usually these deals take time. You have an approval letter from the federal government saying, you can go forward and close. The seller on this transaction was like, what are you guys waiting on? Let's get this closed. HUD has said, yes, let's close it. The problem though, was that there were internal issues. And sometimes if you don't have enough money on your own and you've got to bring in equity groups and you've got to leverage all of these different groups, it's like human behavior. There are still always going to be internal human dynamics. And those human dynamics can oftentimes derail processes no matter how thorough you are. And unfortunately, there's not a hard and fast way of preventing that other than just being upfront and communicating vigorously and rigorously throughout the process, no matter what it is.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about Section 8 and HUD. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
but what are the biggest misconceptions you hear and kind of how do you correct that narrative?
Well, one of the biggest ones that I hear is that, Section 8 properties are basically, slum property. And that's not to say that they don't exist, and clearly they do. I think there are garden varieties of Section 8 properties all across America. Some are really great, some are, not so great, but all are still serving a function and serving a purpose. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions I hear is that that's the work of HUD. You'd be shocked how many very sophisticated real estate investors that I talk to on a week over week basis where they simply believe that that's all HUD does. HUD is all Section 8, it's all affordable housing. And it's a sliver of what the department does. But frankly, there is not enough market share, so to speak, for that to be the only thing that HUD does. Again, the magnitude and the involvement that HUD has in the housing market across the country is much more robust than people give it credit for.
For someone interested in this space, whether they're an investor, developer, or just even passionate about housing, what should they be thinking about differently?
I think they should, one, be thinking about how does this fit into their overall development scheme. And by development, I don't mean just real estate, but just their personal development of how they want to amass wealth. How do they want to acquire those kinds of those kinds of assets? Is it a generational play? Is it something that you're thinking about leaving to your children, your grandchildren, and so forth? Or is this something that where it's a 2 to 3 year play, and then you're flipping this and moving on to the next thing? I think you've got to come armed with some sense of what that looks like in terms of your overall portfolio strategy. I think from a community standpoint, though, really understand where you're doing business and with whom you're doing business, and understanding that every deal has shareholders and partners. Even though they may not be a part of the deal, the people who are a part of the communities where you're building and where you're acquiring and developing, those people are just as integral to the overall outcome of what happens with that development as though they were, as though they were in the deal itself.
Good stuff. Mr. Bruner, sir, thank you for your time. Thank you for your information.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Evan.
And thank you all for listening to Blueprint to Billions with Terry Bruner. To learn more, visit terrybrunerlaw.com. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, share it, and leave us a review. Thank you all for watching.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.